Oh,
That's what she says. All right, sir. Shabbat Shalom, Baruch Hashem. The first thing that I'm going to do is let you know I teach to do the Seder for the Pesach the evening of the 14th rather than the evening of the 15th. And I'm going to tell you why, and then we'll get into it, how everybody feels about it. In studying this area, because it's the first appointed time besides weekly Shabbats of the yearly cycle, and it's the one that sets everybody up for everything else. Okay. To begin with, we can't change anything that the last ruling Sanhedrin ruled on without there being another ruling Sanhedrin to make a change in what the ruling was. Okay? So I'm letting you know this ahead of time. This is why there's so much controversy regarding days and times and calendars and such. Okay? I mainly use the work with the appointed times off of the existing calendar that Rabbinical Judaism works off of. I'm letting you know this as upfront and as forwardly as I can. And I've just cited the reason for that. All of Rabbinical Judaism justifiably will tell you they know that it needs to be corrected. However, until there's another ruling Sanhedrin or Great Assembly to make that ruling change, they're not going to do that. They have a lot of reasons for feeling that way, other than it just being the right thing to do based on the way everything was set up from the time of Moshe. Okay? Now, the idea of great assemblies came originally from Moshe's father-in-law's counsel to Moshe. You had to set up a righteous man over every 10 and every 50 and every 100. Okay. This was the beginning of that council. It had to be one of two, either one of the princes of the tribe, and the princes of the tribe were always a firstborn. So they carried that authority of a firstborn priest. Okay. Or they had to be a son of Aharon. Okay. One of the two was required to sit in an assembly. You had two assemblies from the beginning. You had the lesser or small assembly, and then you had the greater or great assembly. Okay. Both had value. The small assemblies were more localized. The great assembly was always in the city of peace, the city of David. Okay. Now, I'm trying to give you a little background as we go along. Because the modern rulings, they extend from the Hasmonean and other eras, even before the Pharisaic and Palestinian time frame. The Mishnic and the Hasmonean eras were the ones that governed through Ezra's Great Assembly. Okay. Now, Rabbinical Judaism has followed the footsteps of that Great Assembly even through Palestinian Judaism and Pharisaic Judaism. Okay? In that they will make a decision, and if they can't find a way to make the decision with any justification, then they will try to find a justification. Okay? That being said, there's one word for between the evenings for the time to slaughter the animal or the Pesach Seder, the Pesach meal, is what has set off everything else surrounding it. Okay? Now, bear this in mind. Now, we have the Mishnah definitions. And by the time they got to the Pharisaic definitions, they have been changed around. Originally, the definition of between the evenings had to be decided by local authorities. Okay? Because that was way before the vowel point system. Okay? The vowel point system we use today, okay, that was agreed upon by the traditionalists, the Masoretics, also came with several other issues. Okay? They got into a habit if they didn't agree with what somebody else would teach as using a word within a phrase or a passage with a definition that they disagreed with. They used a study basis, because one of the rules that we have in study is we generally will go with the primary definition to get a context and syntax. So the easy way around that, along those lines, times before us, was to switch around which definition was the primary definition and which one was not.
Right.
They began to do that. They also use that whenever they begin to use vowel point systems for vowels and for pronunciation purposes and for one word to relate to another, was how to hide the new Christian movement's idea of Yeshua being the anointed one. There's at least 24 different places where they switch the primary definition around so that nobody could say in study that a particular word had that primary definition, so it could be a lot easier to dismiss. Now, these are not the only things that happen, but for our discussion today, I'm limiting it to this for the moment. Okay, that's the reason people have heard me say when you study, it's better to study Torah and the prophets from scrolls or writings before the vowel point system. Because word order was of primary importance in those times to discover what the primary definition would be based on the word order, which would give it context and syntax. Because without word order, you would have no way of knowing which definition of a word would be appropriate to use within that context. Okay. Now, there is a word that we're going to get into and we're going to bandy it about for a little while, and that word is evening. Way back in Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 1, we have evening and morning, evening and morning, evening and morning, at least 6 times. Okay? The definition of that word there, we know because in the first few verses, it says that he separated the light from the darkness, and he called the light day. So day would not be confused with evening. The first definition given of day is here, where it says he called the light day. Now, darkness, the definition of darkness was chaos, and it still is chaos. So they don't address the nighttime, the darkness, by calling it that, okay, except in modern Pharisaic and rabbinical Judaism, they will call the darkness nighttime. But from the beginning, it was not addressed that way. It was referred to as evening. Okay. Now, if you'll go with me for the moment, go first to Vayikra, Leviticus, chapter 23, verse 32. Everybody there?
Not yet.
Chapter 23 is where the Most High speaks of his appointed times. So please go to verse 32. And whoever's there, please read.
It is a day of complete rest for you, and you shall afflict yourselves on the 9th of the month in the evening. From evening to evening shall you rest on your rest day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There it specifically says, almost universally, evening to evening. Originally, this was related as between the evenings, evening to evening.
Okay.
Now, the word that's used in Hebrew for the afternoon in Shemot, Exodus chapter 12, is related to being between the evenings. From the time of the late Mishnah period, moving into Palestinian Judaism and Pharisaic Judaism, a new definition started being used. And the traditionalists grabbed a hold of it, and when they started using the vowel point system, they made it a primary definition. That definition of between the evenings is from noon of any day until sunset of each day. The whole time frame, because the sun is declining from noon until sunset. With the declining of the sun, it was called, the whole time frame was called evening. So the beginning of that would be noon, the end of it would be sunset. So any time in between that was called between the evenings. And so that was began to be used in Pharisaic Judaism. It began to be used in rabbinical Judaism, and it took hold a lot and a good anchor of it when the vowel point system started to be using, when they started using it. This same argument was what caused a major schism or breaking between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. If you look back in the New Testament renderings, you'll find that even Yeshua and his followers at that time Yeshua, the anointed one, his followers at that time, they did their Seder the evening of the 14th.
Mhm.
And they took him down off the execution stake before the Shabbat of the 15th started. Because you couldn't leave somebody hanging on a tree entering in a Shabbat. Okay? I want you to have as much of this information as I can get it to you reasonably today to help your understanding. Okay? Now, if you'll go to Psalm 55, verse 18. Oh, goodness. I almost forgot. Okay. Let me hold on to that there. Tell me when you're there.
Psalm 51.
Got it.
Psalm 51,
55, please.
55. Thank you.
Everybody there?
Yep.
And Psalm 55, verse 17 and 18, please.
As for me, I will call on God, and Adonai will save me. Evening, morning, and noon, I complain and moan. Then he hears my voice.
Thank you. Good to see you, John.
Good to be here.
Now, you notice in verse 18, it says almost universally, evening, morning, and noon. That constitutes one day. However, if we use between the evenings from noon till sunset, is that going to make any sense? Evening, morning, and noon. Because that takes us then from one evening to another, evening to evening.
Mhm. I've always understood I've always wondered about the between the evening because it seems like it would be between the evening, literally between the evening, from one evening to another evening.
That is one of the definitions. That's the reason you find that in Vayikra, Leviticus 23. Okay. Now, there is yet another definition. Definition that originally the Sadducees used. And evidently Yeshua agreed with the Sadducees because all the Sadducees and 60% of the Sadducees, guess who they were? They were sons of Aharon, Kohanim.
Wow.
They were in charge of all the temple service. They were in charge of all of the itinerant Kohanim. Do you know who the itinerant Kohanim were?
They were the teachers of Israel.
Well, you're right in a way, but itinerant Kohanim were the ones that would go all throughout the kingdom of Israel. The people who couldn't get to the temple, who couldn't do the sacrifices, the offerings, the Quran, and they would minister to those individual clans and tribal people that were unable to make the journeys even during the appointed times. So because they moved around like a nomad, they were called itinerant. My family line has been called that as well many times. We go where the need for teaching Torah is. Now, all of the Sadducees did the Seder for Pesach, the evening of the 14th. This goes back to another definition yet between the evenings. And this still goes back to, even as in Leviticus Vayikra, from one evening to the next evening. Now, that would be sunset to sunset for a whole day. So based on how Yeshua and his followers did their Seder, and all the Sadducees did their Seder, that's what we follow. The time between sunset and total darkness was originally considered the dawn of a new day. Because our days are from sunset to sunset. So from sunset to the hours of complete darkness would be the beginning of a new day. Which is why we know that when the women, after the Shabbat was over, went to the tomb, it wasn't when the sun came up the next day. It was when the daylight left after the Shabbat. They went to see the tomb and found out that the stone had been moved. It was after the Shabbat and that daylight time left that they were also asked, why do you look for the dead among the living? Now, based on what I've shared with you thus far, we can easily say it's true that between the evenings is from noon till sunset. We can also say it's true that between the evenings is from sunset to sunset. So between the evenings can also mean in the afternoon, if that's the way that Dr. Goebel translated it to English from Hebrew to stay away from all of what I'm talking about, the best translation he could come up with was afternoon, to avoid all these things. Now, if you're going to slaughter your animal and start cooking it by the time that is hours of complete darkness, a year-old lamb, you can easily do it in 20 minutes. I know from my own experience, probably Michael, probably others as well. A year-old lamb, you can easily slaughter and quarter. Okay. The only problem you're going to have is the time it takes to bleed out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you're good at slaughtering, then you can have the animal slaughtered, even if it isn't fully quartered, with it all bled out before the hours of darkness. However, and I repeat, however, okay, we have to include, to make this complete, all the other commandments and requirements of the Pesach Seder for it to be complete in concept. Now, before we do that, we got to go a little bit farther in the Psalms So if you can go in chapter 55, you read verse 17 and 18. Now, if you please, go to verse 23, chapter 55, verse 23, and somebody please read.
Cast your burden on Adonai, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be taken.
Oh my. Does anybody know what that means? Nobody wants to venture forth from previous teachings and previous beliefs?
He will uphold you.
What about people that are killed and slaughtered in the Holocaust when the Romans came into Jerusalem and they destroyed the temple?
He upheld them.
Was that not taking the righteous?
Sure.
What about the siege of Masada? Did they take the righteous?
Sure, but he was also sustaining them.
But what does it say?
He will never allow the faltering of the righteous. That doesn't mean that doesn't have the same meaning as him taking a righteous person. That means he isn't going to allow them to fall. He isn't going to allow them to trip.
In what way?
He will, well, in every way, apparently, because it says he will never allow the faltering of the righteous.
Well, what happened to all the people that died?
He brought them to him.
Absolutely.
Maybe they
You
weren't
know
righteous.
that.
Maybe they weren't righteous. Maybe they were worshiping other gods.
Oh my. I was waiting on you. You did not disappoint me, John.
Thank you.
It says in Kohelet and Ecclesiastes that when the body falls or the body dies, where do we as a spirit being go? Back to the one that created it.
Mhm.
So the righteous belong to him. All creation belongs to him. No matter what the effort from those who don't believe to separate any of us from the Most High, he declares it to be an impossibility. This is one of the proof verses where I gave you the prayer. He orders my footsteps and I thank him. He goes out before me, prepares my way, fights all of my battles inside of me and outside of me. Okay. Now, if you'll go to chapter 56 in Psalms, just down from there. And if you'll read in verse 2 through verse 5, please read.
Show me favor, O God, for men yearn to swallow me all the day. Warlike they oppress me. Each day my watchful foes yearn to swallow me, for many battle me, O Most High.
Through 5.
Oh. On the day that I fear, I trust in you. In God I will praise his word. In God I have trusted. I shall not fear. What can mortal flesh do to me?
Now, before this was divided into verses, it read, on the day that I fear, I trust in you. In Elohim, I will praise his word. In Elohim have I trusted, I will not fear. What can mortal flesh do to me? It was a passage. Now, if you will, in chapter 56, go to verse 9, please.
You have recorded my wanderings. You put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book?
So even every tear is counted. Chapter 56, verse 9. Now, if you read further down in chapter 56, read 12 through 14, please.
And Yahweh I have trusted, I shall not fear. What can man do to me? No, wait a minute. 13 and 14?
12 through 14, yes.
Oh, 12 to 14, okay. Upon me, O Elohim, are my vows unto you. I shall render thanksgiving offering to you. For you have rescued my soul from death, even my feet from slumbering, to walk before Yahweh in the light of life.
In the light of light. Now remember, in Bereshit and Genesis in chapter 1, when he divided the light from the darkness, he said, and I will call the light day. And here he declares where to find the light. The light is found in life. And where does the gift of life come from?
Most High.
Yes. So this gives you a little bit more why I've given you the prayers that I have. Now, if we go back to Shemot, Exodus chapter 12, you need to understand a couple of more things about this as we go through it. In verse 2, this month shall be for you the beginnings of the months, the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the entire community of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, each man shall take for himself a lamb for the paternal house, a lamb for each household. It says on the 10th of the month. How many days were we supposed to keep an animal isolated to itself as we examine it and inspect it and watch it? How many days? Anybody remember?
3.5.
Where does it say the half?
Well, that's that time between the evenings issue.
Oh, well, it's actually 3 days based on the instructions given when the tabernacle was raised, the Mishkan.
Okay.
Okay. And if we take the animal on the 10th of the month, we have to count the time we take it. Okay. That would bring us 3 days into the 13th of the month. Okay. Now, the end of the 13th would be sunset. When would we begin to slaughter and quarter and burn over a fire? Once the animal is removed from its isolation from being inspected. So if the 13th ends the sunset, when would we begin to do that?
14.
14.
Uh-huh. And the 14th begins the sunset.
Right.
Now we keep on going.
Right.
Aside from, for example, in verse 5, your lamb shall be an unblemished male in his first year. you shall take it from the sheep or the goats. Why would it say you take a lamb from the goats? People have asked me this question for 25 years or more. How can you take a sheep, a lamb, from the goats?
If you put it over there to be nursed by a goat.
Absolutely. Did we cover this before?
Yeah.
Then a lamb has to be placed among the goats so it can be teated, it can be nourished. We don't have to spend any more time on that one. It shall be in your safekeeping until the 14th day of the month. Again, safekeeping until the 14th. 14th begins when? Sunset.
Sunset.
Okay. Then the whole congregation of the community of Israel shall do what? Slaughter it in the afternoon. When does the afternoon end? Right at sunset. So when does the slaughtering actually begin?
The 13th night.
12:01.
Huh?
12:01 p.m. 1 minute afternoon.
No. Please understand.
Okay.
The animal was inspected into the 13th. The
Right.
last part of the 13th, between the evenings of the 13th, is noon to sunset.
Right.
So if you begin the slaughter in the afternoon, can you slaughter it on the 14th? If you slaughter it on the 14th in the afternoon, you're going to have the Seder on the Shabbat on the 15th. So if you're going to have your Seder in the evening of the 14th, the slaughtering has to be, when does it actually begin?
13th day.
Oh, the afternoon of the 13th?
Right.
Yes. The last part of the afternoon is when? Just before sunset.
Commands us to eat it the night of. Do.
The
So
only
then-
reason, the
Oh,
only
go-
reason I'm saying this, okay. Now, you're familiar with verse 6. It shall be in your safekeeping until the 14th day. At the beginning of the 14th day, what does it tell you to do? Slaughter it in the afternoon. So we either slaughter it the next day of the 14th and have to eat on the 15th, or we have to slaughter it between the evenings of the 13th to where it can be done what? If the slaughter begins at the last part of the 13th, you have to finish the slaughtering in the light after sunset before complete darkness.
Right.
And then, of course, they shall take from the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel in which they eat it. Now, this reinforces what I just told you. They shall eat the meat on this night till the 14th. So how can you eat it on the night of the 14th if you're slaughtering it in the afternoon following the night? You can't slaughter it between the evenings of the 14th because that's noon to sunset. You can't eat it. Now, what's the purpose? Here it says of putting the blood on the lintel and doorposts in which they eat it. And they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs.
Well, you have to have enough time to do all that though.
Yeah,
So you'd have to do it from the 13th night. You'd have to start it at the 13th night
right,
to
right
make
at
it
the
all,
end,
cook it and do all that stuff.
right at the end of the day. Yes, just before sunset. And if it goes on in verse 9, do not eat it underdone, nor well cooked in water, rather roasted in fire. Anything that remains of it, from it, until morning. Morning is what? When the sun comes up.
Right.
So how can you know about that if everybody eats and goes home? First part indicator. And then you shall eat it with girded loins, with shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste, for it is Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh's Passover offering. Verse 12, take note of it. I will pass through Mitzrayim, Egypt, on this night and strike every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from man to beast. I will take vengeance against all of the Elohim of Egypt. I am Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh. The blood shall be your sign on the houses where you are. I will see the blood and pass over you. It shall not be a plague of destruction among you while I strike at the land of Mitzrayim. This was done the night of the 14th.
Right.
So how are you going to keep this part of what's commanded if you're reading the Seder on the night of the 15th?
Right.
Because we're still talking about the 14th of Nisan. In verse 12, I will pass through Mitzrayim on this night. We're still in the 14th. And then in verse 14, this day will be a commemoration for you, and you shall celebrate it as an appointed time, a moedim, a moed, for Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh, for your generations. You shall celebrate it as an eternal statute. And then, once we're finished with the 14th, what does it say? For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. But on the first day, withhold leaven from your household. For whoever eats unleavened bread from the first day until the 7th, that they shall be cut off. On the first day, it shall be a Shabbat, a holy occasion. And on the 7th day, well, because we started eating unleavened bread, matzah, on the 14th, okay, Pharisaic and Rabbinical Judaism count the 14th as the beginning of the Passover week, or the week of unleavened bread. But here it tells us the first day of unleavened bread begins with a Shabbat. That is on the 15th.
Right.
It is a separation between two appointed times. And then they make an exception of something, that the only other exception besides this is Shavuot. With Shavuot, we're allowed to cook and prepare food on that Shabbat. Okay? Here it says in verse 16, on the first day, it shall be a holy occasion, and on the 7th day, it shall be a holy occasion. No kind of work may be done on them. However, whatever needs to be eaten by any person, that alone may be prepared by you. It doesn't say cooked, it says prepared. Most people try to say cooking is a part of preparation. Okay?
Preparation is preparation.
But it does not say here that you can still start a fire on the Shabbat.
Right.
So the fire part had to have already been done. Unless, of course, the fire was brought into the Shabbat from the 14th. Then it can be used.
Mhm.
Okay? This was another area of grievance between Sadducees and Pharisees. Okay. In verse 17, watch over the unleavened bread. For on this very day I took out your legions from the land of Egypt. Observe this day for your generations as an eternal statute. In the first month on the 14th day in the evening. It says that's when you start eating unleavened bread. So, have I made anybody irritated or upset again? Is this making any sense?
Yes, sir.
These are the reasons why we have the Seder on the evening of the 14th rather than the evening of the 15th. To celebrate coming into the week of unleavened bread, we have a second Seder, as they call it, but it's actually a Shabbat meal to bring in the week of unleavened bread. So rabbinical Judaism developed it where there are two Seders, one identical to the other, for the Passover week. But it's not a Passover week because the Passover, by commandment, is one day.
Mhm.
Week of unleavened bread is 7 days. That gives us 8 days of unleavened bread.
Mhm.
Is this making any sense yet?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you have any better understanding of between the evenings?
Yes.
Mhm.
Do we have any questions yet?
I only have one.
What is it?
How long does it actually take for the blood to come out, to let the blood bleed out? You know what I mean? The animal bleed
If
out.
you make the cut on the animal's neck appropriately, it takes 3 to 5 minutes.
Oh, really? Wow, that quick. Okay.
Hanging it.
The heart pumps it out. I mean, to be blunt.
Oh, okay.
If you take a full-grown man between 180 and 250 pounds and hang him upside down and cut both the internal and external carotids on both sides of the neck, he will bleed out in less than 7 minutes.
Wow.
Oh, man.
If trauma injures the femoral artery and a man is not lying down with a tourniquet, he will bleed out in between 3 to 7 minutes. He won't have enough blood left within his body to sustain life. There won't be any blood being pumped back into the heart as he bleeds out.
Okay. Never knew that.
I didn't either.
Well, either slaughtering animals or being on the battlefield. It'll get your attention.
Yes, it would.
Nothing is more disconcerting than trying to get a tourniquet on somebody's leg in time and then feed them a line with blood
Mhm.
so that they can be refurbished and live.
Yeah.
You have a very limited amount of time in those moments. That's the reason for the tourniquets.
Right.
So
Yep.
they don't bleed out.
High and tight.
Yep. Now, does anybody have any questions on this information? I'm not attempting to go against any group, rabbinical Judaism or otherwise. I'm not attempting to go against what anybody else chooses to do based on however they want to interpret this. But you have to take all the commandments together. You can't leave any of them out. They all have to be included. The only way that they're all included is if we do this the way that I've suggested. Even on an appointed time, the only animals that would normally be slaughtered for an offering were done by the Kohanim. The Passover lamb, the Pesach say, was the first commandment given to the entire people and community of Israel. It is the first commandments given that we did as a people in unity, echad, bar none. It is the commandments of the Pesach that brought us together and made us a people. It is the commandments of the Pesach that brought us into the Exodus as a people. I can't over stress the importance of recognizing how the Most High used his commandments to enjoin us and give us echad as a people. And we, as a people echad, were then in the Exodus. But we were involved in the Seder of the Pesach first, which produced that unity that it had as a people. So when we left in the Exodus, we were a people and a people with others, making us a mixed multitude. When people say mixed multitude, they almost always forget that the basis of that mixed multitude were people that were joining the united people of Israel, all the tribes in the Exodus. It was not just a mixed multitude of people going helter-skelter, okay, like a bunch of chickens with their head cut off. They had direction. They had the Most High leading them. They had Moshe bringing them out as well in Aharon. This was not a confusion. The mixed multitude that was following Israel leaving Egypt, they were following us. They were hanging on our fringes, our seat. They were following us as a result of the mighty works of wonder that the Most High had done in Egypt, defeating the gods of Egypt, defeating the God of this world, Pharaoh himself. So the people left with us and died in the wilderness. They were considered a part of us because of what? They became Torah observant as Torah was given. From the time of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and onward. Are there any questions thus far?
Nope.
So
In verse 15, for 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, but on the first day withhold leaven from your house. For whoever eats leaven from the first day until the seventh day that soul shall be cut off from Israel. Remember, what is the definition and meaning of Israel? Those who prevail, those who overcome, or overcomers in him.
What did it mean by being cut off? Will they take them outside the camp and stone them to death, or?
So this was a commandment from the Most High saying he would cut them off from those that he chose.
I see.
Because Israel were his choice. He chose us as a people. So for him to be given the commandments, he's saying they will be cut off from those who prevail, from those who overcome.
I see.
Unfortunately, John, all of Christianity and many others, they do this very thing. Disregarding what it says here. Now, if we go back to Leviticus, Vayikra 2:23 again, you'll find in chapter 23, in verse 4, it does not say these are the feast days. It says in the crown, these are the appointed times of Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh, the holy occasions that you shall announce in their appointed times. In verse 5, in the first month, on the 14th of the month, here it says in the afternoon, but again, that is still between the evenings. The appointed time of the Pesach, or the Pesach, the Passover. This is where groups like to have a little contention. How can I say one thing in one place and another thing in another place? But the word here is still between the evenings. On the 15th day of the month, the appointed time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread for Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh for 7 days, you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day, on verse 7, it is a holy occasion for you. You may not do any work involving labor. Verse 8, you shall offer a fire offering to Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh for 7 days. The seventh day is a holy occasion, the Shabbat that finishes it. You may not do any work involving labor. In verse 9, Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving you and reap its harvest, you shall bring an omer of your first harvest to the Kohen. He shall wave the omer before Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh so that it might be favorable for you. The Kohen shall wave it on the day following the rest day. That's the 16th of Nisan. So the wave offering is done on the 16th. On the day you wave the omer, you shall prepare an unblemished lamb as a burnt offering to Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh. And then all the way down to verse 15, you shall count for yourselves from the day following the rest day, which is the 16th, from the day that you had the wave offering, the 16th, 7 weeks, which shall be complete. You shall count 50 days until the day following the 7th week and offer a new meal offering to Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh. That's how we get to Shabbat. So everybody decided to rename Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, and call it by a Latin and Greek name. What is the word for 50?
Penta.
50.
Pentecost. Yeah, Penta. The 50th day. So they strip away everything the Most High wanted done to call it by a number instead of the Feast of Weeks as his appointed time. 49 days of counting the Omer. It was during the counting of Omer that something happened. Yeshua was in the ground. And then he rose again during the third day. If the women came to the tomb and the stone was rolled away at the beginning of that day, while they were still alive, the dawn of the new day, then he had to rise when on the Shabbat. Now, he rose on the Shabbat, and the first thing he did upon rising was to enter in with the Most High during the Most High's rest day, the Shabbat. And after he entered in, rising from the grave, he walked the earth for how many days?
40.
Yes. So you could count his days by the counting of Omer. Rabbinical Judaism has eliminated almost all of the teachings regarding the 49 days of counting the Omer that would bring us from the first day of unleavened bread to Shavuot, the 50th day of counting. And try to remember that Shavuot is actually the 50th day of counting Omer,
Mhm.
because it says the 50th day in the instructions. Any questions thus far?
No.
Nope.
Now, there is an assembly in Israel today, but they are in the assembly, the members and representatives of that assembly are not Kohanim and priests of the firstborn, princes of the tribes. They're all rabbis from the tribe of Yehuda. Because in Israel, to have an Israeli citizenship, you must join the tribe of Yehuda.
Mhm.
Any questions thus far?
I don't have any.
Only have you been keeping track of current events in Israel, the recent current events?
Yeah, where Netanyahu, the crook, decided to postpone getting rid of the Supreme Court. Is that what you reference?
Yes, with all that demonstrations and stuff. I'm wonder if it's a safe time for a tour group to go there.
Oh, yeah, go right ahead, John.
We've been twice. We'd really love to go again.
Enjoy yourself.
Oh, man. The first time we went, we got there on a Friday evening, just in time for the Shabbat. And we were there, and all the young soldiers were dancing and rejoicing. They had AK-47s or whatever over their shoulders. We were glad they had their safeties on. They could have taken out a lot of people.
Well, if you go right now, make sure to visit Judea and Samaria.
We did. We did. Went all over the place.
You visited Judea and Samaria?
The West Bank, I believe.
Well, they
that's-
changed the name, but it's still Judea and Samaria.
Yes, we did. We went to Bethlehem, Nazareth, went by Shiloh, and we learned that we've all been mispronouncing the name all these years, calling it Shiloh. It's Shiloh.
That is true. And
And
just
we-
for grins and giggles, John, the town of Nazareth did not exist at the time of Yeshua's lifetime.
Wow.
It was not that same town.
It's in a different location.
Another thing that was interesting, the Israeli government is funding excavations all over the place, extensively in the city of David and out in the countryside.
Well, that's not for the benefit of Christians or people who believe in Yeshua. That's for the benefit of the rest of the world, to show that the Palestinians have no grievance and no real.
Claim.
Now, that would be a word that would be nice to use. I was going to say something else, and I was trying not to.
Right?
So I'm not going to be political today. It does get interesting. Does anybody have any questions of what I covered thus far?
Nope.
Okay. If I can find the lesson that I did, I will make an exception, and I will teach on the Omer next week, since Anna can't find her notes. She says they're in storage and she doesn't remember, and her cat died. Her dad's not feeling well. They fixed the red light on her block. She's right
Dog.
behind me, so. So I wanted you to know this information. I didn't go into everything, but these are the highlights. Okay. That's pretty much the bulk of it. If you want to stop the recording, Baruch Hashem.